Major Lindsey and Africa presents Bouncing Back, Conversations about Resilience for Lawyers.
Welcome to Bouncing Back, Resilience for Lawyers. This podcast is brought to you by Major Lindsey and Africa, the global leader in legal search and consulting. I'm your host, Rebecca Glatzer. I'm a managing director in the Associate Practice Group at Major Lindsey and Africa. In this podcast, you'll hear me speak to successful professionals about the hiccups, bumps, bruises, and setbacks they've experienced in their careers and personal lives. And you'll learn how they ultimately bounce back from these experiences to thrive. Today, my guest is Jason Esteves. Jason is a vice president of legal affairs at Equifax, one of the three largest consumer credit reporting agencies in the U.S. At Equifax, Jason leads the handling of sensitive disputes, incidents, and investigations. Prior to joining Equifax, Jason was an associate at the law firm McKenna, Long & Aldridge, now Dittons, here in Atlanta, and he's a graduate of Emory University School of Law. In addition to his role at Equifax, Jason also serves as board chair and as a representative to the Atlanta Public Schools Board of Education. In addition, he serves on the boards of the Georgia Association of Latino Elected Officials and the Latin American Association. Jason, thank you for being my guest today.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So you recently mentioned to me that one of the most difficult experiences of your professional career was surrounding the Atlanta Public School Board not renewing the most recent school superintendent's contract. For those of our listeners who are not from Atlanta or not from Georgia or don't have a good knowledge of that situation, would you go ahead and explain kind of what was happening in your position in all of it?
Yeah, so I am chair of the board, and we had a superintendent who had been in place for about 5, almost 6 years, that came on just as I joined the school board back in 2014. And she was a popular superintendent, and as time went on, the board wanted to go in a different direction. And I, as chair, had to lead that transition from her leadership to the current superintendent's leadership. And during that process, the most difficult piece was telling the then superintendent that we were not going to renew her contract and that we were going to move on. And because of her status in the community and because of the attention that she was receiving, it was a very public thing that was all over the news here in Atlanta.
Yes.
And everyone knew about it. And
yes.
Because I was chair of the board, everyone saw my face associated with our collective decision to move on from the then superintendent. And just to give you a little bit of context, the Atlanta School Board is comprised of 9 elected officials, and we're elected every 4 years. We have a very diverse group of people on that board. And as board chair, I'm the official spokesman of the school board. So for me, you're trying to transition leadership while at the same time wrangling cats, because you have 9 different personalities on a school board. And then you also have the superintendent, and all 10 of us make the governance team of the school system. So that very public challenge, that very public transition was definitely the hardest thing I've gone through professionally so far.
Yeah, and again, for those listeners who are not from Georgia or Atlanta, Atlanta's the capital of Georgia. It's, from a population perspective, we're talking about, the largest city in the state that this governing board governs over. Thousands of school-age students and their parents, in addition to the 9 board members and the superintendent, had opinions about what you guys were doing.
Yeah.
Right. And then, of course, there's Atlanta proper, and then there's Fulton County. That's the county that Atlanta sits in. And these are 2 separate things, but, for the uninitiated, they're sort of part and parcel of one. They get confused, I think, on a regular basis by the public. Fulton County is separate from Atlanta, and Fulton County's school board is separate from Atlanta School Board. But there's this tendency, especially for those that live in the suburbs, to kind of just mix the whole thing together, and then not sort of have a strong understanding of the 2 things. And I also know that this particular superintendent, had her cheerleaders and those that didn't, feel as excited and happy about different things that she was doing. And there's a lot of sort of high-profile situations regarding property and Atlanta City Council. So there's a lot going on, and you got to be the speaking piece and the earpiece for this very high-profile political board. I take from our previous discussions that this was the first time you experienced being in like a media hotbox, if you will, having your face on the front page of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, which is our local newspaper, and regularly being on the nightly news, all 3 of the main channels, 2, 5, and 11, for those of you who are, not familiar with our area. And so did anyone prepare you? Did you kind of know from old school board members or other people what was going to happen, or was it kind of a shock to the system, so to speak?
It is. So to add a little bit more context, and you laid out the context very well, but a couple additional things was that while we're in a political space, right, we're talking about a school board of elected officials. You have a superintendent that is hired by those school board members, but who is also very much a public official. But you also have the fact that she's also our employee. So there's the employee-employer relationship where we can't necessarily freely talk about, our issues, right? We can't can't talk about certain things, just like any other traditional employment relationship. Now, to answer your question, no, nothing prepared me for this, because what made it, for those who don't know, what made it extremely difficult to transition leadership in this situation was that the outgoing superintendent was publicly saying, I don't want to go. The school board is making the wrong decision. So typically, and Rebecca, I surveyed school board members across the country anecdotally, and no one, that situation never happened. Never happened.
Right. So this is a little bit unprecedented on top of being just fraught, politically fraught, personally fraught. Right. Exactly. And I should also, just to give a little more color to the listeners at home, this school board superintendent was highly praised on her way in at various points during her tenure, was, unanimously lauded as being, the right fit, and, various things changed, obviously, in the ensuing years, which is, why the board decided not to renew her contract and decided to go in a different direction. So that, I'm sure, added to the tension, the fact that you all legally could not speak on it, also, and respond to what she was saying, made things extremely difficult. I read some articles in the AJC about this whole situation, and I know there were parents saying, this board is spineless. They need to tell us in public why they made their decisions. And as you aptly pointed out, and all the lawyers listening will totally understand, being her employer, legally prevents you from doing some of those things, or creates a liability situation if you were to respond. So,
Yeah, I had to take those hits, particularly as a spokesperson. But the AJC also reported on the fact that within days of our announcement of not renewing, we received a letter from her attorney telling us we couldn't talk and say certain things, threatening legal action, which further, kind of caused us to not be able to say much. So yes, I was caught, particularly as the face of this whole thing. I was in a very precarious position where I would absolutely love to have said more, but for many reasons, I couldn't. So the only position I could take was just to say what I could, and then just take the hits, the public beating.
That's right. And again, for the listeners, this is Jason's other job. Jason has two jobs.
Some would say part-time job.
Yeah, right. I don't know I don't know. I'm trying to decide, what the approach, is APS really part-time, or is it just a second full-time job? And you are a husband, and you are a father of two young children. And so, I can't imagine, what it's like to be dealing with all of this. I was curious, how your wife and kids reacted to all of this as an initial matter. Did you prepare them? Were they prepared? Did you try to shield them from all of this mess?
Well, look, luckily my kids were young enough to not even know what was happening. And for all you parents out there, you could be having the worst day ever, and your kids not realize it, and just as soon as you walk in the door, run at you and jump at you, and you have to receive them like you're not having the worst day in the world. So in many ways, my kids help balance me. So I'm very appreciative of that.
Yes.
And then my wife, she was fully supportive. She tries not to get into the politics in the political world. She tries, and I appreciate that, because I think it would be too much for us to talk, public service too much. So she knows where my heart is. She knows where she understood the why, and she lives this with me each and every day. So for her, she understood more than the average person, and also at the same time understood that her husband was in this challenging situation. So all she did was do a very good job of supporting me, and not focusing too much on this issue, and making light of the fact that there's so much more going on, including my professional career, my job at Equifax.
That's right. Which brings me to my next question. So, you're maintaining two jobs, and was the data breach at Equifax happening at the same? Was there overlap? Were you having two really stressful moments, or were things a little calmer in the moment? I realize it's a contracted thing, but Equifax, as many people know, unfortunately had to deal with some of its own fallout from a data breach not too long ago that was very public. And so I was curious, were both, things on fire at the same time, or was one a little bit calmer for you while the other one was on fire?
Fortunately not. Fortunately, the incident at Equifax happened a couple of years earlier, and it was dying down by the time that this occurred. it's just unfortunate how that kind of timing works
Yeah.
out, where you don't have too many big fires burning at the same time.
Right. That would have just been probably too much. But curious about how Equifax handled the fact that you had this, very public, very political, and let's be honest, like personally draining. You knew all the players, I'm sure you had your own feelings about all of this that went down with APS. And so you are, again, biting your tongue, and then you're also, and taking punches in the media, very public punches in the media, and probably private punches too. I'm sure you got letters and phone calls and texts and that sort of thing. And then you got to go to work in the morning.
Yep.
You've got to pick yourself up and go perform and do your job as an attorney at Equifax. And I was wondering, how they kind of handled that and supported you and, in this sort of trying time.
Yeah, and I have to shout out my Equifax colleagues for all that they do for me personally, but also just professionally. I have always, from the beginning of my career, starting with McKenna, Long, and Aldridge, when I was an associate there, I've always tried to keep whatever I'm doing community service or public service wise, keep that separate from my professional career. So even when I ran for office, I tried to keep those two worlds separate. And at Equifax, I do the same thing. I try not to bring the APS world into the Equifax world. So, and I pride myself on that, because I don't want any codependency. I don't want to be dependent on an elected position, and at the same time, I don't want that elected position to necessarily get me anywhere, right? Like that. I don't want there to be any kind of incentives on either side. And because I approach it that way, the good thing about this is, and many of the folks listening may agree with this, a lot of folks just don't pay attention to the politics. While there are some senior folks at the company that were paying attention, a lot of folks, a lot of my colleagues, my coworkers were not. They would see my face on the TV and would think it was just another, day at the APS office, at the APS board office. They didn't think twice. I also had senior leaders talk to me and just make sure that I was okay, which I appreciated, and to offer their advice. But for the most part, that's all it was just support. And I continued to do my work. I at no point felt the need to act like or carry on as if I was in a crisis. When I was at work, I was at work. And if I needed to step away to handle something APS related, I did that. But I kept going as if nothing was happening. And that's how I carry myself in normal times, and that's how I try to carry myself in times of crisis as well. And I think that helps me when it comes to, when you're in a situation like that. If my two worlds were connected, right, I would probably have a much different response to your question.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you made these very clear lines for yourself, prior to, and like you said, it kind of helped you going through a difficult scenario. In addition to that takeaway of if you've got extracurriculars, if you will, keeping those things very separate so they don't affect your work and vice versa. What other takeaways, would you, let's say, share with your kids from that, being in that sort of, again, hot box experience of being, on the front page of the AJC and seeing your face on the news every night, any sort of other lessons that you learned from that experience?
Yeah, I would say two things. One, I would say there's always the light at the end of the tunnel. The end of the tunnel will always come, no matter how long it takes.
Yes.
Every crisis comes to an end.
Yes.
And it may feel like you're in the middle of a hurricane, an endless hurricane. At some point, you get out on the other side. And if you stay true to yourself, if you keep your head down and do the work, whatever that work is, right? But if you just keep your head down and stay focused on the end goal, it will be okay, no matter how many hits, whether it's mentally or personally or professionally, whatever it is. No matter the hits, you'll get through on the other side. So that's the first thing I would say. The other thing I would say is that going along with just doing the work, when you have that sense of optimism, when you have that like I talked about before, I keep my professional career and my public life separate. I continue to work at Equifax, worked hard. I tell folks that the day after the announcement of the board's decision not to renew the contract, and I was all over the news, and I was stressed out, I was barely sleeping. A senior leader at the company emailed me. I'm on the legal team, emailed me and wanted me to come see her the next day. And I thought, Rebecca, that this was it. this was the time where both of my worlds collide, right? And here I am, thinking through my talking points and here's why the board decided this, and here's why, while I am on the news every day, it's not me personally, it's APS. I was trying to think through all kinds of things to say to her, because I was like, oh, this is it. They're going to tell me I either leave the company or quit the school board. And I walk in to her office, and she asked, how am I doing? And I'm like, in my head, I'm thinking like, stressed. and I responded, I'm okay, and asked how she was doing. We did some small talk, and then she hands me a job description and says, hey, wanted to talk to you about this opportunity. And in my hands is an opportunity to grow from the position that I had at the time. It was essentially a promotion. And I'm thinking while I'm sitting there, like, how amazing for this to be happening in my professional career at the same time that my public life feels like it's in shambles. I'm in crisis mode in one area, but in the other area, here's this amazing opportunity. And to me, for folks who, no matter what the crisis is, whether it's a public issue or a private issue, when you're staying focused and you keep doing what you love, you keep doing other things, it will be okay. And that may be just me being over optimistic, but I have a personal story to tell about that. And I know countless other people, big or small, may not be a promotion of a job, may not be front page of a newspaper issue, but they have stories of, some of the best things that happen at the worst times, and vice versa. So
And to your point, I can't help but wonder, and I'm curious if you've wondered this as well, if perhaps seeing you perform well and represent yourself and APS well in the public arena somehow influenced, their thinking about, promoting you to senior VP, or did that have nothing to do with it? I'm curious if that's something you've asked yourself or you've asked them, if one thing impacted the other, or again, like you said, you've kept such a clear sort of line of demarcation. Maybe it was a non-issue. I was curious about that, what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I don't think the incident itself had, the crisis itself had something to do with that. But certainly as a leader on the APS board, I'm honing and developing skills that I exhibit at work.
Yes.
Right? Yes. Being able to talk to senior leaders is easier for me than other people. And it's because I talk to a lot of senior leaders across the city each and every day.
Right.
And I've been in those rooms. So, that kind of muscle that junior associates or mid-level associates are trying to work at, I work constantly in my public life. So, so did the fact that I was promoted have something to do with the skills that I've attained while on the school board? Absolutely, because I think I've been able to work at a skill set that lends itself towards being a leader, whether it's on the school board or at work. Yeah,
definitely. That makes complete and total sense. And to your point, folks in law firms don't necessarily, depending on their position, especially if they're like junior associates, don't necessarily get the opportunity to flex those muscles. Oftentimes, at least in the very beginning of their career, it's, the marching orders come from above and, do this assignment or do this thing. And they may not be talking to clients directly and that sort of thing. And to your point, you definitely had your share of opportunity to speak to people senior to you, numerically older than you, people who've been perhaps around Atlanta politics for a very long time, especially in the beginning, and, might have thought you were a little upstart, that kind of thing. And so handling those different situations where the power dynamic may not have been in your favor, at least in the beginning, is something that's an art form. It's an art and it's a science. And it sounds like you've honed that really well. That kind of brings me to, sort of another question of, for the folks who are listening, who want to make the leap from law firm to in-house, and we often see as recruiters, this need for what I call soft skills. It's not, do you know this particular area of the law, or can you write a brief, or can you create, this transactional document, but it's, can you take a sort of complicated legal idea and convey it to a business person, an internal client, or, how do you tell someone no, and explain to them why, doing X, Y, or Z, creates a legal problem. That skill is highly coveted in the in-house world. And in my experience, can be difficult to come by, candidates who have that. Any advice for the listening audience who, really wants to go in-house, but maybe hasn't had an opportunity to hone those skills yet?
Yeah. And it sounds like, I'm sure, something that people at firms have heard before, but I've always felt like being engaged in other activities outside of the legal world have helped me attain skills that are helpful for the business world, helpful for being in-house.
Yeah.
When you're at a law firm, you know, you're drafting briefs, you're drafting contracts. You don't have as much exposure to the non-legal person, particularly as an associate.
Yes.
You don't have as much exposure to the client, particularly the bigger clients. You don't have as much exposure and insight into kind of what they're thinking and what the average person, because lawyers aren't average. Lawyers are special
All
people.
type A go-getters.
Yeah, yeah. So what I try to tell folks is to expose themselves as much as they can to normal people, just not for fun, but like actually doing work, whether that's community service, community work, whether that's whatever it is. Expose yourself to non-lawyer things where you're actually working with people who are not lawyers. And, you know, whether you want to say a law firm, that can be considered honing your business development skills, right? Because you're broadening your network. But even as an in-house lawyer, you're relied upon for legal advice. You're relied upon for risk assessment and just the analytical thinking that lawyers have honed from law school and their experience. We don't get to flex that as much when you hang around too many lawyers. You do get to flex that. You do get to flex that when you're hanging around non-lawyers, because they're going to rely on you for the type of advice that you would be giving in-house.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's great advice. That's super helpful. Transitioning to a sort of related topic, speaking of, you know, skills we hone over time, you know, I think you bounced back beautifully from that experience with APS, and, you know, the timing, you know, couldn't have been better, I think, in your career and in your trajectory. You know, when social scientists think about and discuss people who are resilient and have strong resilience skills and bounce back from difficult experiences, you know, one of the things that they talk about is people usually have seen resilience either demonstrated to them before by, you know, someone they know, they love or know or close to, a mentor, a parent, that sort of thing, or they have some sort of experience in their youth that, you know, creates resilience in them, whether they were bullied or had some sort of, you know, illness or that sort of thing. I was curious how your strength, your resilience, your ability to bounce back, where that comes from for you, Jason.
I mean, I would say it comes from my mom, without a doubt. She is a single mother who raised 2 kids. My parents divorced when I was 13. My sister was 11, and my mom had to pick up everything and become a single mom. And not only did she pick up everything and leave, but we left town and went to a city. And I'm from Columbus, Georgia, but we moved from Columbus to Orlando, a place where she didn't know anyone.
Wow.
And a place where it was an escape for her, but it was also a challenge for her because she had to work 3 jobs at one point to make sure that she was making ends meet for all of us. And throughout that experience, her sense of optimism never left. Even when I saw her cry, even when I knew she was having a tough day, she was always optimistic and always wiping away those tears for us. And and I carry that with me each and every day. And, you know, she has Alzheimer's now, and I'm her caretaker. So it's even challenging for me to see her today and even answer that question because, you know, I've seen how the disease has taken so much away from her, but her resilience is an example that not only I've grown, I noticed and learned from and have, as a result, become who I am today, but is something that I hope I can give to my children.
Yes, definitely. Well, it definitely sounds like she left her mark on you. And, you know, this is certainly skills that can be passed from generation to generation. It sounds like she did a wonderful job of doing that. I'm continually impressed with how you manage so many different things so well, Jason. So she definitely, I'm like, I think you have 3 or 4 jobs right now, maybe 5. I don't know.
Yeah.
I won't count. I won't count. Several.
And you know what? The other thing, she also instilled in me public service and giving back to the community and being grateful for what you have and reaching back and helping others. Even when she was working three jobs and was barely home while I was in high school because she worked all those jobs, you know, she was still volunteering. She was still giving to those who were lower income than her. She was still doing all these things. And I would actually, at that time, I was like, why? Why are you donating to this drive? We barely have anything. Like, why are you giving money to this? You barely have any. Like, I was questioning her as a you know, dumb high school kid. And her answer is, we're blessed. And because we're blessed, we have a responsibility.
Yeah.
And that stuck with me.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. One last question for you, Jason, as we're kind of wrapping up here. This past year, obviously, has been difficult for lots of people for lots of different reasons, but in particular, young, newly practicing attorneys, I think for many of them, you know, being furloughed or laid off or facing pay cuts, uncertainty about their careers and personal lives, you know, for the first time has been a little shocking. I think many of the millennials and Gen Xers in particular were too young to really be impacted by the Great Recession like we were. So many of them don't really have a point of reference for, you know, what's going on right now, you know, economically and you know, with the pandemic, and obviously the fallout from that is going to be going on for quite some time. What advice do you have, you know, for young, new attorneys who are experiencing these, you know, hiccups and bumps right now?
You know, I would say that while it feels like we're in the middle of a hurricane, and because of how long it's been, it feels like we're in a hell of a long one.
Yes.
There is a bright sun and hopefully a beach on the other side.
Yes.
That where the fruits of your labor can be enjoyed. And while this may seem bad, you know, folks will tell you that 2008 was a different kind of bad, and other folks will tell you that 2001 and 2002 was a different type of bad. And
right.
You know, we all have these periods in time where an interruption like this in the legal world happened.
Yes.
But every time, lawyers and the profession bounce right back.
Yes.
So the advice that I would give them is the same kind of advice that I gave earlier. Stay focused, continue to do the work of positioning yourself to take advantage of the opportunities that you're looking for when the time comes. And we have no clue when that time's going to be, right? But if you're ready, you'll be able to take advantage of it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So do the work now.
Do the work now. Yeah. In whatever form or shape that takes, whether that's finding a new job or getting those skills or, building a book of business or getting yourself in the right place, to be able to take advantage of the opportunities that are hopefully coming in the future years. Well, Jason, thank you so much for your time sharing your experiences with our listeners today. I know that they will get a lot out of your story, just as I have. I sincerely appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Bouncing Back, Resilience for Lawyers. Join us next time for another story about thriving after overcoming challenges. You can find Bouncing Back and other programming for lawyers on MLA's Legal Talk Network.